Welcome to another exciting episode of the Business of Digital podcast, featuring your hosts, Matt Siltala and Dave Rohr. Hey guys, excited to have everybody on another one of these Business of Digital podcast episodes. And today we have a special guest with us, Dave. We have Kevin Indig with G2. And so welcome, Kevin. I appreciate you joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
And I know that we got Dave over there. How's it going, bud?
I am here, ready to ramble.
All right, so let's get ready to ramble. We don't want to get sued for that, so scratch that. Just all right. So what we'll do, Kevin, because I just gave you that quick intro that you're with G2, but you are the vice president of content and SEO. And so if there's anything else that you think that our listeners would like to hear about you, like feel free to just give a little intro about yourself, and then I know that Dave will jump in, and because the whole purpose of us chatting with you, he found a tweet that you did interesting, and so we'll just take it from there and go from there.
Sounds good to me. Yeah, I'm not going to dwell on for too long. I've been in this space that is SEO for a bit over 10 years now. Started on the agency side, then moved in-house, worked at companies like Searchmetrics, Dailymotion, Atlassian, and now G2. Started in the very technical SEO space, broadened up over time, and now I'm more or less at the intersection of SEO and growth. And I also write a weekly email or newsletter called TechBound, and that fills up 99% of my time.
Excellent. So Dave, if you're ready, just jump in. Let's get to the tweet and we'll go from there.
And Kevin didn't mention it, but he's also done a number of videos on YouTube that we'll include a link to with some good interviews. Some of them are pretty technical. So for some of our listeners that don't give a hoot about technical SEO stuff, some of them might not work, but there's a ton of them that no matter what your space is, will probably be interesting. So the question that you posed, Mr. Kevin, was a legit question, as you said. Why do you think in-house SEOs have such a hard time getting engineering design resources? Before we dig into any that I was able to procure from a couple people or from your responses, what would be your initial response?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. My initial response would be is because SEOs don't make good business cases, and I'm probably going to offend a couple of people with that. And that's okay, but I think that we don't seek enough responsibility on our own side. And I think that in most cases, and I include myself into that, don't get me wrong. I think I learned over time. I think I got really good at this, but I used to not be good at this at all, right? And I know what the other side looks like. So I think most of the time we just bring asks to the table. We don't show opportunities enough. We don't speak dollar enough. And that's one of the reasons for why SEOs don't get enough resources.
Can you give an example?
Yes, of course. So something like, hey, I need, say, 8 hours of engineering or developer time to fix broken titles. That's a really weak business case. That makes sense to SEOs, but that tells nothing to CMOs, CPOs, CTOs, CEOs, any C-suite person, any VP person, probably not like maybe some directors, depending on how big the company is. And so instead, what you want to say is, hey, what I need is X amount of time, and it doesn't have to be 100% exact, right? But you have to have some sort of rationale. And what I want to do is going to do X, and the result of that is probably going to drive X conversions or maybe even dollars, right? That's the important point. Like, what is the impact of what you are suggesting? And I perfectly know that we're dealing with imperfect information in SEO. We cannot guarantee results, and there's a lot of complexity involved. But that should not be an excuse for us to just lay back and say, I don't know, live with it. Because reality is that a lot of things are very uncertain in business, but other departments seem to make a better business case to get resources. So we can go really deep into the complexity of making these business cases and how to, quote unquote, speak dollar. But that's, in my mind, one of the biggest problems in SEO, maybe the biggest one that holds SEOs back. I changed my opinion over time, right? I used to think that it's all about the latest trick and going super technical, and that's where all the gold is, but that's not where the gold is. The gold is in getting things done.
I love that you say that, and I love that you put it that way, because that's what I've been trying to preach forever. I I get so frustrated sometimes at just like following the shiny things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of shiny stuff out there. Don't get me wrong. I love SEO. I mean, I've been doing this for over 10 years now, and it's super satisfying to dig for new things that might work, to test, to come up with creative stuff, to compete in a highly competitive niche. All of those things are fun, and I love them. But none of these things matter if you don't get things on the road.
Very true. And I think also about a lot of that too. A lot of us back in the day, we did that. A lot of us had sites, personal things that we tested where we pushed the limits and we did, stuff like that. But I don't know that it's appropriate to do that in a different kind of a situation when with other people's money, and you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And the way that I see it is, first of all, I completely agree with you. I think one of the reasons for why I have a career is because I was very early on pushed to have my own projects and learn from them. And on another thing that comes to mind when you mentioned that is that another thing that we SEOs don't do well enough is to test things at small scale. Like it can be super scientific, right? I have, for example, a data scientist here at G2. She's a statistician and she's absolutely brilliant. And she can help us if we, for example, want to run tests on title tags to come up with a statistically significant sample size and time to run the test based on traffic, conversion rate, impact, all this cool stuff, right? But it doesn't always have to be that sophisticated, right? But it can also be a very simple thing of like, make a change on a page and see what happens. It doesn't tell you as much, right? But that's where you start, and then you build on that. And when you bring something like that to the table, that can also give you resources, right? If you go to an executive and say, hey, look, I want to take I want to take 8 hours of developer time, but I would love to make the case first with maybe half an hour. That's very easy to say yes to. And that's also a very easy decision, right? You can then say, hey, if the test shows this, then we're going to go for it. If the test shows that, then we're going to not go for it. And that leaves an impression on executives, I promise.
It's funny, and I'll stop interrupting. I know Dave's been wanting to jump into this and ask you questions, but it was funny because it got me thinking of a conversation I had just this morning with Mike Benner here, and talking about, yeah, sure, there's so much stuff that he could be doing SEO wise, and like I guess you would look at it at like 203 or 303 type levels, but he knows right now where he needs work in certain things is instead of the simple thing like you were saying, like with images, he's got hundreds if not thousands of images of different things, and currently labeled 457.jpg, knowing that those need to be switched to keywords and then matching them up with the proper URLs and the simple stuff. And he's like, let me get through with these simple things that I know that need to be done, and then I can work towards some of these other things that people keep talking about that must be done. And I kind of look at it like that from what you're saying too. It just finding that priority and starting making those simple things work at first.
Absolutely. Basics are very powerful. And I have to sometimes painfully remind myself on that. And I don't think you can do the basics well enough. So, I think there's a lot more low-hanging fruit than sometimes SEOs might think there is. And I think SEOs also tend to make things complicated. I certainly did in the beginning of my career. I always was like, okay, what's the most complex problem I can solve out there? No, start with the most simple one, measure the impact, bring that to the table, and you'll see it will build on each other. That's another art, or that's another skill that I learned. And I wrote about this in an article that I recently published on my blog called Mastering the Art of In-House SEO. And I strongly believe that in-house SEO is a skill. Like, you can learn it, you can refine it, and you have to learn it to be successful. And one of these things is to build on small successes and showing them over and over. And that will be an entry ticket or a door opener for more resources.
That leads me to, you talked about you have a data person for a really small company that is just starting out, or someone that's just starting out in SEO. They probably don't even know what data they would feed that person. For an in-house person that is doing full-time SEO, maybe has 1 or 2 developers, has a small team of support, but they don't even have, there's no way they even have access to Tableau, and they probably don't even have BI installed. And, if they have Excel, that's probably all they use. what data points and what data in general would you say that they would start to go to beyond the very, very basics, but not to the point where you're doing that kind of really deep down analysis?
Right. So in general, I would always start with data as close to the money as possible, right? As close to revenue as you can. And in some businesses, it's relatively straightforward, right? I think, for example, in e-commerce or maybe even in advertising-driven businesses, it's easier to make the connection between traffic and money. It gets much, much harder in businesses where you have a sales team involved, at least a sales team that stands between revenue and traffic, right? They got close contacts, they got to nurture leads, all the good and fun stuff. That's much, much harder. So that's where I would start, And so in best case, you can point at the impact of organic traffic from revenue, but at least show some sort of impact, show traffic impact, organic traffic impact. I think user behavior metrics are also very often very fuzzy. I would try to shy away from that. It's cool to show, hey, our time on site improved somewhat, but there's so many things that go into this, and you have to be hyper specific to show an improvement on user behavior, right? Like there's so much gray zone, so much you can argue about, not always is longer time on site better. So I would shy away from that. And then, conversions are what I would really go for. Even with a sales-driven business, I would try to look at an increase of MQLs. And sometimes it can be as simple as, hey, we changed the title tag, we got more traffic. As a result, we noticed more MQLs on that specific page. That can be really it. But that last part is often missing, right? And then also, if you actually want to do a good job, look at how much an MQL is worth. And then or see how much of that business actually closed, and then then you can attach a dollar amount to it, right? And then you can go from there.
I really, 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 really miss getting keyword data from Google on the SEO side. We used to, when I worked at SurePayroll, we actually had it set up that I was tracking that keyword on it. I knew the landing page that you came in and the keyword, and I put that into Salesforce. And every month, when I would look at rankings and traffic to pages and stuff, and the quote unquote leads or form fill outs, we would then look at MQLs and SQLs and what business closed. And then we would go back to those keywords, just like they would do on PPC side. And so every month, it didn't really matter if we ranked number 5 or number 1 or number 8. What really mattered was the keywords that we were targeting and the keywords that were driving traffic. Were they driving qualified people to our sales team, or was the sales team going to come over and bop me in the head?
Yeah, we all miss those good old days.
But just having that level of data was beautiful.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt. I think my personal opinion is that SEO has gotten way more complex over time. And some people like to fight me on that, but I still hold on to that opinion. And I have also a feeling that some of our PPC colleagues, brothers and sisters, are suffering under that right now, where Google is getting way fuzzier with their keyword reports and sometimes doesn't even report that data. And so as a result, or as a reaction to that, we have to rely more on the page level data and the actual traffic or clicks that arrive there. We can still say in some cases, hey, 80% of that traffic, or at least 80% of the clicks come from keyword X, but it certainly has gotten much, much fuzzier and much, much more difficult to attribute it to keywords. So, but there's some trends that kind of play into our hands as well. One is that pages now can rank, or not now, but for a couple of years already can rank for hundreds, sometimes thousands of keywords. And on the other hand, this traditional click curve in the search results, where the first result gets by far the most clicks, and you hardly get anything on position 5 and 6. I think that's flattening a bit, and there's some data to show that, for example, from Nielsen Group. So things just change, and I think it becomes less an 80-20 thing and more maybe a 60-40 situation. But we're getting philosophical here.
It's about, I was looking, I know Will over at Seer Interactive has been looking at it, and I know someone else looked at it, and they created a script, and I'll find a link and I'll drop it in there. I know we're talking SEO, but that's also interesting for SEO people, because I've always looked at the search terms from PPC people, because I want to know, when we lost that data, I've always wanted to know from the PPC side, not what you're bidding on, wrongly or correctly, but I want to know which keywords that people are searching for are actually converting so that I can make sure that we're optimizing for it and that it's, something we're targeting.
I think it's a very smart thing to do, right? I think that's another thing that SEOs should hopefully somewhat rely more on is paid data, to quickly test new landing pages, quickly test content, quickly test keywords, all that good stuff. And if you have the monetary funds and you constantly bid on certain keywords, you get a much better idea of its search volume than Keyword Planner can give you or any other tool, right? I think impressions are the true search volume, and if you have a paid campaign running for a long enough time, you get really smart about that. So yeah, I think that's a great way to get smart about a lot of things in SEO.
So I asked a couple people some questions, the same question that you asked. Michelle Robbins had a point that I think you and I and Matt have all seen, and I think a number of people on your thread talked about it. But it was that most important consideration is whether or not the SEO team has earned a seat at the table, and also the relationship with devs. A lot of times I see SEOs teams passed between one internal group, especially the larger the company, the more often this SEO team or group or whatever gets shuffled between PR and dev, and they don't know where to put them. Do you think from an SEO standpoint of fighting for budget, fighting for resources, what have you seen or what have you done that's worked?
Yeah, that's a really good point from Michelle. What I have seen is that it very much depends on how important SEO is to the business in general. And I was lucky to always work in-house for companies that really rely on SEO, right? Think of Dailymotion, Atlassian, G2, like very SEO-driven businesses. But on the agency side, the first half of my career, I was consulting lots of enterprise companies, and many of them did not have a high reliance on SEO and therefore did not have big SEO teams. And so I would always start with asking myself, what do I actually need to be successful? So the good thing is that or good or bad, however you see it, right? Thing is that if you work in a company that might not rely so heavily on SEO, maybe technical SEO is not the biggest driver. Maybe it's more a content marketing-like approach, which still has some technical SEO elements, but not as strongly. And maybe you can get a lot of stuff done without engineers. But then you fight for writers and for designers, right? Or for PR people. So there's probably always a fight. And again, a couple of things that worked really well for me in the past is, again, first of all, speak money. Second of all, to not burn your relationship with weak asks, like the one that I mentioned at the beginning, that can really burn it. And then third of all, to really evangelize and advocate for SEO. So when I was at Atlassian, the SEO team was about 5 people, depends on who you count in or not. But that would have never been enough. 15, 20 SEOs would not have been enough for the traffic and from the size of the business. So instead, and I knew I was never going to get so many people for my team. And so instead, I went out on a campaign to evangelize SEO throughout the company. I showed some of the successes that we had, the things that we did, what's currently working well in SEO, things that our competitors are doing to be successfly. And then I had workshops with writers, engineers, designers, and really instructed them of what moves the needle, and to make sure that when they accomplished a success or did something that drove traffic, to immediately report it back to them and close the feedback loop and show them the impact of that. So I think there's this meta game of relationship building, of evangelization and storytelling that is another missing component of which SEOs don't spend enough time with.
Yeah, without a champion, it gets really difficult. And I think one of the, I know I've talked about it before, but Ryan Jones has this hilarious example where the agency he was at, they were working with a large company and they were trying to get some video put on the site, and they were trying to get the PR people to actually work with them and promote it. And the PR people wouldn't work with them. And finally they got an answer. It was because the PR people were bonused on something completely different.
Yeah.
So it actually, them promoting that would help the company, but it would hurt that entire team and that group.
Wow. Yeah. Those horror stories happen. I've heard of some of those as well. And so I think there's also an opinion that might offend some people, but I think there might be situations and companies where you just can't win the battle, and then you have to leave. You have to either accept that you don't get enough resources and make the best out of that situation, or you leave, and that's okay as well. Not every company has to live on SEO. Not everywhere does SEO have to play the highest priority or a priority at all. And it's a harsh reality, but it's a reality.
I think that's true. Well, and there's also no matter what you do, Kevin, no matter what slides you put in front of me, as the CTO, I'm looking at you going, I have 6 developers and I have 1 project manager and I have this other technical person, and they're booked on this project for the next year. So no matter what you do, I can't touch anything.
That's true. That's absolutely true. That happens a lot. I think the only counterpunch to that situation is to show enough urgency and enough value from a monetary perspective. And sometimes you can make a case on competitors or new competitors that move really fast, do an amazing job, are growing at a much, much faster pace. And if you are able to connect that, again, with dollars or with money, and you are able to speak to leadership about that, that is a way for you to maybe counteract that. But, it's a tough battle. It's a tough fight.
So I know we didn't want to keep you too long. So if you had one last tip for how to master the art of in-house SEO, what would, if someone was just starting up, what would you tell them?
Take a storytelling course and look at the data that you have available and spend time on telling stories with that data. And that data can be traffic data, can be conversion data, revenue data, whatever. But get better at getting people excited about SEO. If you go to an SEO and you tell them, oh man, our technical SEO audit was terrible and we have all these 302s and my gosh, and he's going to say, yeah, that's awesome. I'll talk to you in a month or something, But if you're able to talk in a gripping story with that people can relate to, that's the gangster move in my mind.
Well, actually, I'm going to piggyback on that. Take what Kevin said, tell that story, but also know your audience. So if you're talking to your boss, what things do they care about? What are they bonused on? What are they looking at? What are they trying to fight for budget? If you're talking to the CTO, if you're talking to a developer, if you're talking to someone else, understand, PR, social, PPC, understand what projects they're working on, understand what the product is coming out, what new things are coming out, understand how to tie your story and your projects into whatever they're working on. Also, what level they're at and what they care about. If you can tell your story so that it matters to them, that data will then suddenly they'll actually look at it. If you're just telling everyone the same story, the CTO, the CFO is not going to care. He's just going to see you spending money. If you start pointing out more about the ROI in your story than you did about the savings in tech updates that you're going to have to do for the next year because you're going to do this different thing, that each person's going to care about something different.
Oh yeah. Nothing to add here. At some point.
Well, again, Kevin, thank you very much for joining us. And so again, Kevin Indig with G2. We do appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks. This was fun.
All right. So for Kevin with G2 and Dave Rohr with Northside Metrics, I'm Matt Siltel with Avalanche Media, and thank you guys for joining us, and we look forward to having you on another one of these episodes. As a final reminder, we are on we're on Spotify. Make sure you go and check us out anywhere that you find us. Give us a 5-star review so we can continue to bring these to you. We appreciate and love that. And so thank you guys, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks.